So if I'm being honest, I really thought this game was just too cutesy for me. I really didn't think I would be into it, and I kinda thought it was meant for a certain type of game. Not me, really. But I was wrong. And after playing about 25 hours of Witchspring R, I'd like to say that I'm actually a fan of the game. There is more to the game than meets the eye, especially at the very beginning, as it does come off as a very cutesy anime JRPG that tends to focus more around story and dialogue and less around combat. But that is just the facade, that is just the beginning. You see, because when you peel back some of the layers of the game, you find out that it's got some pretty deep mechanics. There's quite a few RPG elements that someone like me can really appreciate. So today, let's sit back, relax, and talk about Witchspring R. But before we get into it, as always, please hit that like and subscribe button, help the channel grow. We are on that road to 2K, hopefully by 2025. Mean a lot to me. Anyway, so let's talk about Witchspring R. Now, the main character in this is named Pieberry, and one of her main motivations, her main goals, is just to eat human food, essentially. Namely pies, or at least that's what she calls them. I don't know, I cannot confirm or deny that she's actually eating pies. There's reference to the fact that she's eating like soldiers' MREs, like she is trapping and killing, or at least knocking out soldiers and taking their food. If that sounds like some messed up version of Blair Witch, understand, it's the soldiers who are actually tracking her down and trying to hunt her type down. And there does seem to be this like supernatural element that keeps Pieberry and witches apart from humans. And this is good and bad, because in some ways Pieberry wants to explore a little bit more. She feels trapped inside of this forest, and inside this forest every now and then there'll be soldiers that make their way in as they're hunting witches. Now, namely, the big supernatural element is a giant golem who stands as a gateway between the human world and the witch forest. And all of that gets disrupted when one of Pieberry's favorite targets, a certain human who happens to carry a lot of food with him, ventures in hunting for her and ends up being the one that's hunted. Pieberry actually finds a way out of the forest. Now again, she was merely trying to kind of hunt this human down and steal his food, but ends up finding a way out. And this is where the game really begins. If you thought the story was a little soft, yeah, it sort of is at the beginning, but there is much more depth to the game. Not only in story, as you do find out why she is sort of trapped in this forest. You find out what her potential is. Not only that, but the gameplay itself has many more levels that you sort of unravel as you play the game. Now, there are some that from the get you have knowledge of, at least, like potion creation, things like crafting. All of these things are elements of the game that you're introduced to relatively early, and they work really well, and they're pretty easy to implement. But there's other things like pets. There's a pet system in the game, and you can collect like 20 different pets. You can use them for different strategies, whether it be navigating around the map or even in combat to an extent. And yes, there are some pets that you actually can mount and ride around. Not all of them, but some of them. And as you add up a lot of the different elements of this game, you get pets, you get crafting, you get potion crafting, you get spells. You're able to train Pieberry, allowing her to upgrade in certain skills, or to really just be more powerful in certain spells. Direction that you kind of want to go, you dictate some of that. You're not going to come out with like Pieberry being like this badass kind of melee fighter. It's just not going to happen. She's a witch. But there is some customization inside of that limited role. And I know a make or break thing for a lot of people is going to be the combat system itself, which this is a turn-based combat system. When it comes to most RPGs, if I'm being honest, that's what I prefer. But I will say that this one specifically, it was simple. There's not a lot to it, if I'm being honest. It's fun, and honestly, it never really imposes itself, and it becomes something that is just part of the game itself, but never becomes something you feel you need to master. There's never a moment where you say, oh, strategy is so important here, that you feel you have to master the combat technique or you have to master some sort of strategy to be able to get further in the game. Now, there is some grinding elements to it, but that's about as far as it goes. It's really just predicated on what level you are and how powerful Pieberry is herself. As, like I said, the strategy component itself just isn't really that important in the game. And so for some people, that's going to be important. Some people, they're not going to care and they're just going to enjoy the ride. And I will say this, as it is a little bit grindy, grindy. It's just a little bit grindy. It's not overwhelming, and they really do respect your time. And I have to be honest, I wasn't sure how I felt about the game, because there were some elements that I really do appreciate. A lot of the things like crafting and potion creation and things of that nature I found really interesting and fun to explore. Even being able to just go out and collect things and maybe try to find a way to make like this ultimate wand or something of that nature I found really interesting. The combat, on the other hand, I felt was a little too simple. And I do feel like if you're going to do a turn-based combat, you really have to put a little bit more energy into it. I think that turn-based combat is always more fun when there's more strategy, when there is a little bit more of that element to it, or why else do you even really have it? But again, I think that it's welcoming for most people, as I do think that there is a significant amount of people that don't want to get into the weeds with different strategies and things of that nature and can find that overwhelming and kind of frustrating. So I get why they have it this way. And then there's also the element of it just being really cutesy. Yeah, it was something that I personally had to kind of look through and see how I felt about. Now, I do think that graphically the game actually looks really good. I also think that the game performs well. All of those things are there. And yes, that anime art style is something that can be good or bad. It all depends on how it's presented. And in this one, it is really presented more to be on that cutesy side. And as I said, for me personally, I prefer the games to be more serious, more dark, and to be less of that like cutesy anime style. And I will say, with a lot of the dialogue, the cutscenes, which do seem to go on for quite a while in a lot of ways, there's just quite a bit of dialogue in the game. That all plays into that, like I said, kind of cutesy style. And for me personally, it's just not really my thing. So I had to be objective about it and realize that if that is your thing, though I think that they present it in a very well manner, and I think that the story itself is engaging. There is a lot of great story elements to it, a lot of good writing, if I'm being honest. Again, I prefer something a little bit more serious, a little bit more dark, and the game never really goes to that level. There is that element of a serious tone to it, but it's ultimately never as macabre as I prefer. But again, I think that's more of a me problem. I won't get off the couch unless the one-winged angel himself is coming down to destroy the planet. But no, seriously, I do feel like fans of this style of game are gonna really like Witchspring R. I think it really does a great job of being a fantastic JRPG, and ultimately, I would give it a solid 8.5 out of 10. For me, it took around that 25-hour mark to beat, but that's kind of hard to say. It for most people, I would argue, would go between 20 to 30 hours. I don't know, because I mess around a lot. In RPGs in general, I just typically tend to grind so that I never do run into a wall or anything, and also just to see how far I can make my character. But I think for most people, they're gonna enjoy this game, especially if you, like I said, like JRPGs. This one's a solid one. But I'm curious what your thoughts are. Is this something you're interested in? Is this a game you've heard of? Anything and everything in that comment section is much appreciated. I love each and every one of you guys. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.